After months of build-up, debate, and endless polls, the European elections have finally happened. And as expected and feared, far-right parties with anti-migration platforms have made significant gains in these elections. With the European Parliament more right-wing than ever, what will the ramifications of this new political landscape be on the EU's migration policy? Welcome to Changing the Table, where we uncover the obstacles faced by new Europeans in politics. I'm your host, Seden Anlar, and on this podcast, we're not only examining how migrants can be empowered to take a seat at the decision-making table, but we're also deconstructing harmful narratives about migrants to change the table itself. In this episode, we'll be exploring what the European Parliament election results mean for migration policy. And to answer this question, I'll be speaking with Dr. Carmina Conte, a senior legal policy analyst at the Migration Policy Group. We will also hear from activists and campaigners from around Europe, like Vote Diaspora ambassadors Samira Brahimi from Italy, Kel Kondok from Spain, and Adel Al-Baghdadi, the founder of We organization in the Netherlands and vice president of Voicify. Take a listen. Over 180 million people across the EU cast their votes to determine who would represent them in the European Parliament. Some like Samira voted because there is simply so much at stake.
I went to vote because voting is not only our right, but it was our chance of using our power to shape the European future.
And as Adele says, the very present and future of migration policy in the EU was at stake too.
I did go out and vote for the European election because participation for me in democratic process is really crucial for shaping policies that affects migration, diversity and inclusion. These elections were actually offering the opportunity to support candidates and parties that prioritize these issues on a European scale as well.
And for others like Kel, seeing others mobilizing inspired them to vote.
What really moved me, in addition to internal motivations, was seeing people who were never political before suddenly speaking out, especially on social media. People just urging everyone to go out and vote. And I saw that across different platforms and across different countries, which was quite touching.
But that was still pretty much half of the eligible electorate. While this means there has not been a decline in turnout from the previous 2019 European elections, only half of the eligible voters showing up to the polls, despite so much being at stake, has left disappointment in the air.
I'm quite disappointed about the election turnout. Almost a half of the European citizens choose to not use their power, letting the others choose for them.
However, what did work and got people out to vote was connecting with voters and having a dialogue.
I feel that campaigns that worked locally, including meeting and exchanging with people, were more effective. For example, some people that were targeted by Diaspora Vote campaign wrote me after the European elections telling me that it was their first time voting, and being involved in one of our in-person events helped them to go and vote.
As someone who worked on campaigning on a European level but also on a national level, I think what really helped is the online training that we hosted with different migrant-led organizations, but also the face-to-face meetups and meetings that we organized on a national level in the Netherlands, that the people had the opportunity to talk with the politicians, to have dialogue with each other, to exchange ideas and the reason and the whys of going to vote, and hearing some people also frustration from the current situation, and so that was I think really what helped.
When it comes to the results, it's true that far-right parties have made significant gains, especially in countries like Germany and France, which is already bearing political consequences. like in France with President Emmanuel Macron calling for a snap election following his party's defeat to Marine Le Pen's far-right National Rally Party. Similarly, in Germany, the far-right party AfD received the most votes in Germany's eastern federal states and became the second largest party overall. And these results from Germany suggest that only about 30% of German voters still support the traffic light coalition, the current government. And despite calls for a snap election, the German government has ruled it out, though it's important to note that general elections will be held in the country next year. Most importantly, in both countries, these far-right parties have a strong anti-migration platform. So needless to say, there's disappointment in the air for the results too.
For me, the turnout of the results, there were some positive outcomes, of course, but concerns remain about the rise of the xenophobia and the challenges that might bring foreign inclusive policies.
However, amidst the far-right's gains, it's not all doom and gloom. Parties with platforms that stand for migrants' rights have made unexpected strides in certain regions. In the Nordic countries, for example, Finland's Left Alliance and Denmark's Green Left achieved notable victories. The Dutch Left-Green Merger Party also saw success in the Netherlands and expanded their presence in several Eastern European countries. Over in the south, Portugal saw some significant shifts. The Socialist and Liberal parties defeated the far-right Chega party, which saw its share of votes fall from 18% in the recent legislative elections to 9.8%. Chega's platform has been marked by hateful rhetoric, including proposals for confinement zones for Roma people and racist and Islamophobic statements from party leader André Ventura. Hopefully this suggests a more nuanced voter sentiment than the headlines might portray. That being said, at the EU level, it's clear that there has been a significant shift to the right on the political spectrum. While center parties like the European People's Party, EPP, still hold sway, this is the most right-wing parliament we've ever had. And this shift in Europe's political landscape is crucial, indicating potential changes in the direction of EU policies, particularly when it comes to areas like migration, which right-wing parties heavily instrumentalized during the campaign period. But what exactly can we expect from EU policy making when it comes to migration for the next 5 years? I talked to Dr. Carmine Conte, a senior legal policy analyst from the Migration Policy Group, to find out. Carmine, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
The results of the European election revealed a lot about where European societies are at and what the priorities are for voters. But I think the campaigning periods and the platforms of political parties reveal a lot about the socio-political dynamics of societies too. This time around, the discourse around the elections was heavily focused on migration. What did this campaign period, the political platforms, the parties, and the media coverage show us in terms of where Europe stands when it comes to migration policy and narratives?
Yes, as you said, migration is always a very relevant topic in all campaign at national level, but also at European level. However, it's a topic that is often instrumentalized by political party, and it's very polarizing topic. So migration is always, I think, addressed by media from an emergency perspective as a problem to be fixed. There is no proper narrative on migration that takes into account the needs of people, the needs of asylum seekers. And this has been also reflected in the political debate, and that is overly focused on border management, return policies, responsibility sharing on asylum and migration issues. But the debate, both at political level but also at social and level, has not really focused on important topics such as inclusion and integration of migrants, refugees in our society. So I think that this topic is always addressed from a short-term perspective, an approach doesn't really focus real on the long-term perspective on how member states really have to work for the integration of migrants in our society. Also, as I said, this is a topic that is often instrumentalized to polarize society at a national level, and it really becomes every time an important topic for the national campaign. So it's rarely addressed from an international, global, European perspective. So it's often used by political parties at national level to divide society and to gain votes and support. And I think this has been one of the major factors as well for the success of the far right and national level. And I think all these problems will be reflected then in the discussion also of the European Parliament.
Mm-hmm. And in hindsight, what do you think civil society and those political parties that are not anti-migration, what they could have done differently to ensure that migration wasn't instrumentalized or weaponized?
Yeah, that's a very difficult question. But I think all the left, more liberal parties will benefit from changing a bit the narrative on migration. Migration is a human phenomenon that take place all the time in our society. So this narrative that is always focused on emergency of migrations, especially on the fear of the European society that feel overwhelmed by these migration flows coming to Europe. This is something that has to be somehow changed in our language, in how we talk about migration. I think we should instead focus more on the positive, let's say, aspect of migration, or what migration brings in the long term in our societies, in terms of also on the impact on our labor market, on the impact on our demographic growth, also in terms of the cultural, let's say, diversity, the aspect that positive aspect that migration can bring to our society. And also, we often forget that people have the right to claim asylum in Europe, and people flee from wars, persecutions in their country. So this is something that I think was completely missed, completely lost in our debate, but also in the media. We are forgetting that there are really serious issues around the world. So we are just, I think, addressing this topic from a bit of a selfish perspective, let's say a bit of from a defensive perspective. Europe has to close its border. We have to protect our way of living, but we are not really looking at what's happening also outside Europe, and what are now the main challenges for people fleeing their country. So I think that we should a bit reverse the narrative on migration, and also looking at what are the fundamental rights of the people that are fleeing their country and are coming to Europe, and what can we as European bring to improve their life, and what you have to do to make sure that they can actually claim asylum safely and legally in our country. Instead, we see that we really close the door to asylum seekers. There is a real lack of legal pathway for asylum seekers to come to Europe and claim asylum, and we are instead externalizing the asylum system. So this, I think, will be reversing the narrative and really emphasizing the human rights needs of migrants. I think will be very, very, very important to change the narrative on this topic.
Mm-hmm. I think that's enough looking back. Let's now look forward to the next mandate of the European Parliament, EU lawmaking, and how this will impact policy on migration. For example, in April this year, before the European elections, the EU passed the Migration Pact, a comprehensive set of laws aimed at managing migration across the bloc. And the pact was widely criticized by human rights NGOs who argued that it will normalize the arbitrary use of immigration detention, including for children and families, increase racial profiling, use crisis procedures to enable pushbacks and return people to so-called safe third countries where they are actually at risk of violence, torture, and arbitrary imprisonment. What do you expect to see from EU policy making for the next 5 years when it comes to migration?
Yes, now I think the main topic, the main challenge for the next 5 years at European level is the implementation of the pact on migration. We know that just in the last months, the European Parliament adopted this pact on migration. This was a huge effort. Both the Commission and the Parliament recognize this as a historical, let's say, achievement and political success towards the outcome of a compromise, of course, between the two main groups, the EPP and Social Democrats. But now the ball is in the court of the member states because for the next 2 years the member states have the main obligation, the main challenge to actually implement this pact at their national level. This, I think, will bring a lot of tensions because I think the pact still maintain the main responsibility for managing immigration flows and asylum requests on the member states at the external borders of the European Union, and also introduce some solidarity mechanism that will be very complicated to actually implement. And they will require a really huge collaboration among the member states. But we know member states are very nationalistic on these issues. They want to protect their territories, their borders. So I'm skeptical about seeing how Hungary, Poland will collaborate actually with Italy, France, Germany on this on sharing asylum requests, because the new pact actually foresee that member states can either relocate and host asylum applicants from this country under migratory pressure, or provide this country with financial contribution. In my opinion, this mechanism is unlikely to function because of the political skepticism within several national governments about the need of fair redistribute and relocate asylum seekers. Also, it's unclear how this financial contribution will be actually used, with the risk being that member states could potentially redirect these funds towards the construction of detention center or even stricter border controls. So I foresee that not an easy scenario in the next 5 years, where there's going to be a lot of tension among the member states in applying this pact, in applying the responsibility sharing mechanism of this pact, especially consider the fact that the member states are very divided on migration, and are really now trying to protect their own territory and the political support at national level.
So in a way, the fact that the Migration Pact was signed in the previous mandate might have kind of crystallized the situation a bit and might actually protect us from a worse policy line from coming from a more right-wing parliament, right?
Yes, exactly. Because if the APP will keep collaborating with the Social Democrats, I think that they will mainly focus on supporting the member states in the implementation of the pact. They were the main supporters of the pact. They reached this agreement after years and years of negotiation. So I don't think that they will have the energy or the capacity to really reopen this discussion. So I think that they will keep promoting this pact as it is now. Instead, if the APP will decide to go with the far right, and this is possible because on single files, on single votings, there is still the possibility that the APP will be supported by the far right groups. And I know that they will push for even more restrictive policies than the ones that are included now in the pact. So we have to really be careful in the next 5 years how things will go, and how the far right will influence the decision-making process at the European level. This is going to be a crucial topic, and then we will see how this is going to affect, of course, migration.
Okay. And if the next steps are implementation related, what can be done now concretely on the national level?
Yes, I think that the implementation of the pact, as I said, is crucial, and we need a proper monitoring of this implementation of the pact in the next years. It's really important that at national level, NGO, civil societies, and political party that support a more human rights friendly approach, they will monitor the implementation of the pact, and they will raise the issues about the implementation of the pact, especially in terms of the detention of migrants, the access to the asylum system, in terms of return policies that have to be carried out still in a human way. So there will be many issues that will arise in the next 5 months. We will really need civil society that will be super focused and careful in following these developments and defend, of course, the fundamental rights of migrants.
We heard it from Dr. Carmine Conte on what to expect from EU policy making on migration for the next 5 years. Looking forward, the elections might be over, but politics doesn't stop here. There's still hope in activism, political participation in between election cycles, and holding politicians to account. The activists and campaigners I talked to are cautious, but still hopeful.
I'm concerned about the lack of participation and the rise of extreme right-wing and nationalist parties, but at the same time I'm hopeful that these results are an electric shock for the future, pushing people to mobilize as it is happening right now in France.
I have many wishes for this mandate, but I also want to be realistic. And while most of the media's attention has focused on the success of the far right, the truth is that the center-right were the real winners, and they already held a majority in the European Parliament. So in that sense, I hope for things not to drastically shift to the right on the one hand, and on the other hand, even though the current scenario may not seem very promising, I am hopeful because several new MEPs with racial background and several young MEPs have been elected, and I'm hopeful that their voices can raise critical concerns and bring a fresh and much needed approach to politics at the European level.
For me, for the future, I'm really hopeful that increasing awareness and grassroots movement will continue to push for policies that prioritize the diversity and the inclusion. And also the collaboration and the collaborative efforts across borders can definitely lead to more meaningful change in how migration is also managed and how diversity is celebrated within Europe.
So there is a lot of work to do ahead. But amid a highly politicized year like 2024 and seeing fear and hate play a big role in elections, I know that it takes its toll on activists and migrants and many more. You're not alone, and there are many people who feel the same. So please take care of yourselves and protect your mental health. And thank you for caring enough to tune into this podcast. Changing the Table is produced by the New Europeans Initiative, a project of the Migration Policy Group, an independent Brussels-based think and do tank that sets the agenda on integration, migration, and anti-discrimination. Funding for the podcast is provided by the Citizens, Equality, Rights, and Values Program of the European Union. I'm your host and producer, Seden Anlar. If you like this episode, please subscribe and spread the word. Changing the Table is available on all podcast platforms. If you want to stay updated, follow the Migration Policy Group on social media at MigPolGroup and subscribe to the newsletter at www.migpolgroup.com. Thank you, and see you soon.